For those who I haven't met yet, I'm Zoe Sapin, the Student Membership Coordinator at the Kentucky Society of CPAs. Broadly, my role is to develop programming for accounting students, support them in their journeys through school to the point of getting their license, and work with educators such as yourself to help students in any way that I can. KYCPA has a couple of upcoming events that may be of note to your students. Our Student Ambassador Program is accepting applications until September 8th, and our Accounting Interview Day program is accepting resume submissions until September 10th. If you'd like more information about either of those items, you can look on our website or feel free to email me with any questions about those. I'm really excited to have our two presenters talk about the changes that are coming to the CPA exam in 2024. My hope is that this workshop will help you feel better prepared to talk to your students about the exam. After all, you guys are your students' best and most valuable resource when it comes to learning about the CPA pathway and the exam. So first we have Richard Gallagher, the Senior Director of Examinations from the AICPA. And after Richard's presentation, we will have Joe Donahue, the Executive Director from the Kentucky State Board of Accountancy. Each will have a presentation with opportunity for questions. And of course, we'll have time at the end for additional questions and discussion. So without further ado, we'll get started with Richard Gallagher from the AICPA and his presentation.
Thanks so much, Zoe. Let me share my screen if I could. Hopefully this comes up the way we want it to. And if I come over here, so I trust you're seeing my slides. Great. So just a little bit about myself real quickly. I've been with the AICPA 9-10 years at this point in time. I am a retired partner from EY on the audit side. Spent a whole bunch of years there with that. And okay, I keep getting messages that Zoom is dropping. Are you still seeing my slides?
We don't see your slides anymore, but we still see you.
All right, well, let me try and pull the slides up again. I apologize. Hang on. Let me see. Share screen. Okay.
There we go. We got it now.
Okay, great. So this is what we're going to cover. It's going to be a bit of a sprint to get through this. I also provided Zoe a PDF of these slides, and there's some additional slides in there as well that she can share with you. And you have questions on any of them, I'm happy to deal with them, now or in the future. So we'll cover off at a high level CPA evolution, a practice analysis, what we just did, the 24 exam that's coming out, talk a little bit about AI and some articles you may have seen, and then get into some resources for educators. And if we have time, I'll get into some survey work we've done over the last couple of years with both professors as well as candidates. So CPA Evolution, joint project of AICPA and NASPA, probably actually started back in the 2019-2020 timeframe, started in earnest in probably 21. And kind of the question is why? I think everybody's been trying to say there's so much going on in the world right now. And you think of, if you go back to when I took the exam a million years ago, in the 70s, we probably were up to FAS 8, and now we're way beyond that, obviously. So just so many different accounting standards, tax regulations, just so much going on, technology coming out. So how do you squeeze this all into the limited amount of real estate we have for an exam? So that was one of the big drivers of this. The other thing is we're really, our goal is always to focus on what newly licensed CPAs need to know to protect the public interest. So that's what the exam is about. It's a licensure exam, and that's what drives everything. You'll see on this slide, and we'll get into it a little bit more, the core accounting, auditing, tax, and it's got this line and technology down below it. When we first started doing this work, the technology was alongside accounting, auditing, and tax. The reality is technology underpins everything an accounting CPA needs to know and do these days. So that's why we kind of moved it down below. It's tested throughout, and I'll go through that as well. So this concept of a core and a discipline exam, right now everybody takes the same 4 sections of the exam currently: Aud, BEC, FAR, and Reg. The new model, just jumping back here, it's going to be accounting, auditing, and tax. So that's our, FAR, Aud, and Reg. That they will continue, albeit in a little bit different format. BEC goes away, and people choose a discipline, and that's one of the 3 disciplines: business analysis and reporting, tax compliance and planning, or information systems and controls. The core, those 3 primary sections, that's what all newly licensed CPAs need to know. Then candidates will have the option to select a discipline of their choosing to drill further down into the knowledge and skills required in that particular domain. Knowledge and skills needed by all newly licensed CPAs: digital and data-driven mindset, data analytics. I mean, we've heard that, probably since 2019. We've been hearing all about data analytics, technical accounting. Yeah, the foundational stuff. Everybody needs to know this. IT, cybersecurity. I mean, you look around us, everything is so technology based at this point in time: software systems, applications, the exposures created by cyber, lots and lots going on in that particular space. Critical thinking and problem solving. This we heard back, pretty heavily in 2017 when I first came on board. We were hearing, we're hiring a lot of smart kids out of school, but they can't solve problems. So how do we change the exam up? What do we need to assess to make sure that that knowledge they have, they can apply the knowledge? And understanding business process and controls, and I'll get into this a little bit. We've done a series of practice analysis over years, and I was a little bit surprised at this one because I've been hearing about this probably for almost the 40 years, 50 years I've been in practice. People need to understand business processes and controls. Critically important, and that hasn't gone away. So some of this stuff is a little bit new, and some of it, quite honestly, is foundational. Back looking at the licensure models again. So we talk about this strong core, what everybody needs to know, knowledge and skills in one of these 3 disciplines. This is what actually happens in practice when you think about it. When somebody gets into a firm, typically they're going to choose a path, whether it be going into the tax department, whether it be going into the audit department, now going into a consulting group, information systems and controls. So it's kind of a natural to have these kind of pillars as our disciplines. No matter what discipline you'll take, there's going to be one CPA license issued. There's no distinction among by the license based on a discipline that you've taken. And we think it's a better, approach in how do we kind of manage the real estate of what we assess, focused on that core, and then where a person might be interested to pursue a little bit in a little bit more depth. And you'll see here, the exam's going to launch January 24. The currently anticipated date is January 10th of 24. And Joe will go into a bunch more on the transition matters related to that. So I won't go through all of that now because I know Joe is going to cover that. So practice analysis, what is it? We talk a lot about a practice analysis. Because this is a licensing exam, we need to make sure there's a connection between what we're going to assess on the exam and what people are licensed to do. So a practice analysis is a research study that we undertake, and we've actually done 3 of these since I've been on board, starting in 2015. We did one that went through 2016, a new exam in 2017 at that point in time. We did another one 2019 and 2020, and that exam launched in 21. And now we've got the CPA evolution aligned exam coming out in a little bit right now. And what we do, and you'll see, I'll talk a little bit about task statements in a bit. We're really focused on what newly licensed CPAs are doing and what's important and critical to their jobs. And that's how we determine what needs to be assessed on the exam. And we do this by actually going out to the profession. So we do lots of work with the profession in terms of focus groups, surveys, and the like, to focus on what are these critical knowledge and skills people need to know. And I will tell you, the CPA exam, we assess the minimum level of knowledge and skills that a newly licensed CPA needs to have to protect the public interest, all right? And that may sound a little odd. I always say, when did I ever do anything to a minimum in my life? But because this is a licensing exam, it's setting the bar. So it's the minimum bar, and that's not saying it's a 2-foot bar, and it's also not, a 7.5-foot high jump, but it is a rigorous level of what newly licensed CPAs need to know. We did all of this work over, 21 and 22. We came out last summer. We had an exposure draft that went out, went through in detail how we plan to allocate what we would assess between the core exams and the discipline exams. There was a lot of focus on data and technology, as I mentioned earlier, and I'll talk on what we're assessing in ISC and the tax compliance and planning sections, because that's probably the newest material we're going to have in the exam. So we did come out with a final report, and this is on our website. I would certainly highly recommend that you take a look at this final report. It includes an analysis of how we got to where we got to in the process. Additionally, it includes the final blueprint, and I'll talk more about the blueprint because the blueprint's absolutely critical for you all to be familiar with, both to help your students as well as to kind of step back and assess your programs as well, where your programs are versus the blueprint. And I mentioned the exam's going to launch January 10th to 24. So what's the exam about? So what do you need to become a CPA? And we used to talk about this as the 3 E's, and now it's the 4 E's, education, experience, ethics, and the exam. We added ethics, certainly the exam, we do assess ethics both in the OD section of the exam as well as in the reg section of the exam. But there's probably more than 3/4 of the states have a separate ethics exam requirement at this point in time. And whether that's taking the AICPA ethics CPE training, or whether it may be a state specific exam. And I quite honestly, I apologize, I don't know whether Kentucky has a separate ethics exam or not, but I know, for example, New Jersey, where I live and work, we do have a requirement that all newly licensed have to take the New Jersey ethics exam within 6 months, I believe, of their licensure. I know, for example, California has their own ethics exam as well. And education over here, I'm talking to a bunch of academics here, educators. This is your role over here, the education side. And it's absolutely critical, the role you guys have in all of this. I can't applaud you enough for what you do. The survey work that we've done over the years that I've been with the AICPA, educators are, professors, the #1 influencer of young students deciding to pursue CPA. So you all have an absolutely critical role that you play, and I thank you for that. And I really want you to appreciate how important that is, because we have heard that time and time again in every one of the surveys we've done that I've been around from 2015 through current, and we're just wrapping up one right now. So real important to that. Experience, typically 1 to 2 years experience requirement. The ethics I mentioned, and the exam. That's what it takes to become a CPA. So exam's still designed at the 1 to 2 year level. That's the experience requirement for most states. So that's kind of the entree point when we design the exam. That's what we're looking at, somebody with about 1 to 2 years worth of experience. There's not any new education or experience requirements with the exam. As I mentioned, 3 core sections and 1 discipline section. You can take the sections in any order. For example, somebody who might want to pursue tax would take the reg exam, and because they just studied up on a reg exam, they may just want to continue on to the TCP, the tax compliance and planning discipline exam. So, you know, people have that choice. They can do whatever they want in that regard. You'll see here no separate time limit to pass core and discipline, 18 months from passing the first section, and you'll see an asterisk there. There's been some movement on that, and I'm sure Joe will talk about this. That 18 months, it's been recommended at this point in time it go to 30 months, and that's under consideration by the states, because that needs to be adopted and implemented on a state-by-state basis. Candidates can't take an additional discipline exam. They can't say, okay, I got a gold star, so I'm going to take an extra discipline exam. Not part of the process. And I mentioned earlier, it's not going to differentiate the license. Everybody's going to have the same license. What it comes down to, as a CPA, CPAs have a professional responsibility that they shouldn't be undertaking work that they don't have the knowledge and skills to complete. So, you know, it's a matter of professional conduct that effectively manages that requirement. Here's the blueprints. And you'll see this is the blueprint that we issued. It was approved by the board on December 1st. It came out in early January of 23 and is going to be effective in January 24. We've been using this blueprint concept since 2017. And I think it's really a great document. This is the official document that defines the nature and scope of what we assess on the exam. Covers off the content weighting, you know, by area, the skill weightings, because we tested 4 different skill levels. Remember and understand application analysis and evaluation. Includes representative tasks, and that's really the work we do in the practice analysis, getting down to that level, as well as references, which is kind of, you know, where do we pull our material, what's eligible for assessment. This is a picture of a detail page from the blueprint, and so you can see the level of detail. Here we're talking about from the OD blueprint, performing further procedures, use of data and information, and it goes into over here, requesting, preparing, and transforming data, the 4 different skill levels that indicates the skill levels that we're allowed to assess, as well as representative tasks. And those representative tasks are not, you know, fully encapsulating, I call them kind of umbrella, what would be fair game to be assessed. But you can look to this and say, well, how does my course line up against this? And so I think that's one of the important uses of this for you as you look at your curriculum. But it's also important for candidates because they can use this as they prepare for the exam. Do I know this or don't I know this? Focus on data and technology, kind of trying to keep this moving. So I mentioned early on, it's all about data and technology being pervasive. So you'll see here how data is structured and information flows through underlying IT systems and business processes. And that goes back to that earlier point I made about the importance of understanding controls and business processes. Because if you got a lot of data, but it's not controlled, what good is it? You know, so that's really important. Determining methods to transform data to make it useful for decision making. You know, people need to understand, what are the sources of data? How could I use this? Where can I take data from one place and match it up with data from another place? Very important kinds of completeness and accuracy of source data. Kind of almost back to the first point again, garbage in, garbage out. You need to make sure you're dealing with a good data source to begin with. And then what do you do with it? So, you know, how would you use these data, these tools, visualizations, the case may be, you know, in whether it be doing an audit, preparing financial statements, or doing tax work. And so this is, you know, this is going to be pervasive throughout all sections of the exam. Now, I will tell you, it's probably, where's it going to be heavier? It's probably going to be heavier in bar, pardon me, certainly heaviest in OD. You know, after that, probably FAR and bar, over into certainly ISC is going to be very heavy into technology. I mean, that's what ISC is all about, and probably least in tax and reg. But I will you tell one of the things we have done a fair amount of work relative to tax is looking at, okay, what's changed in tax as a result of technology. And obviously there's been lots of automation in tax. So historically, we probably assessed how do you get to this right number? Now we're giving people kind of a number and saying, okay, what's potentially, this came out of the system, this came out of a process, what's wrong with this? And how would you look at it from that way? So a different, way we're going to be looking to assess things. As I mentioned, ISC and TCP are the two newest sections of the exam. So you'll see here, the first bullet goes to ISC, IT infrastructure, platform services, security, confidentiality, and privacy. So the trust services criteria from the CPA, and SOC engagements, system and organization control engagements. It says they're going to be assessed in ISC. Now, the one thing I will tell you, ISC is primarily going to be more aligned with assessing SOC 2 engagements on a trust services criteria. SOC 1 engagements are going to be assessed pretty heavily in the odd section of the exam, because if you're, SOC 1 engagements are more focused on internal controls over financial reporting. So as a result, that's why that's assessed over there. Some of the new area we're getting into, personal financial and tax planning in the TCP discipline. And that's kind of a natural evolution, quite honestly, of, well, if you're working on tax returns, an extension of that is kind of, well, what are tax planning and what would be fit financial planning coming out of that? So that's going to be the approach there. So that's kind of about the exam real quick. I know I'm running short on time here already. AI in the CPA exam. Real quickly, I'm not sure many of you may have seen a couple of articles in Accounting Today, probably back in the May-June timeframe, where they were saying that ChatGPT first failed the exam, and then they said ChatGPT passed the CPA exam. And the reality is, ChatGPT didn't do either, because it didn't take the exam. They were taking questions, some from review course providers, some that were, retired questions available on the internet. And it was only multiple choice questions. And they just did it based on a percentage correct, incorrect, which is, the way we score the CPA exam is, I can tell you, we've got a much more complex scoring model taking into the difficulty of each individual question on the exam. And this is probably an area I know a lot of. When I had a face-to-face meeting with New Jersey educators, and I know they're all pretty uptight over ChatGPT and how they're going to be dealing with it in their classrooms. In particular, they were starting to deal with it at the end of last year, but I think they're really concerned how this is going to impact them going forward next year. But bottom line is, the exam is secure. We run it out of Prometric test centers. Our item bank is secure. We have some outsiders we work with who do troll the internet. We're constantly looking to see whether people are sharing information about the exam they've taken. So we do an awful lot to make sure we've got a private and secure exam, and we're going to continue to deal with it on that basis. So that's that. Real quickly, resources for academics. You'll see here the blueprints. Look at your program specifically. This is kind of trying to match it up. One of the things we have heard is not all schools may be able to offer all disciplines, and that may be a possibility. I think I've heard a lot, the biggest challenge may be on that information systems and control side. One of the things and this is kind of from my perspective, I think the way some programs could maybe help start getting into that area by bringing on adjunct faculty who are actually working in that space in the profession. That may be a way to help you kind of make a bit of an inroad to that particular area. But, some schools are going to have to sit back and say, okay, well, what can I do? How can I focus the resources I have to best prepare my students for what they're going to be interested in? We do have this way to CPA.com faculty. There's lots of resources out there available to you in terms of case studies that you could use. In addition, we run faculty hours typically at least once a month, sometimes twice a month. We have run a number of them where they've gone through in a lot of detail, what is covered off in each one of the exam sections. And they have been recorded and are archived on that website. So if there's a section of the exam that you're particularly interested in, you can do a deeper dive on that section by going to take a look at that website. Foundational competencies, a couple of years ago, our academic group put out a CPA evolution curriculum that is not being maintained going forward now that the blueprint is in place. That was done to try and give people a little bit of a head start, quite honestly. In place of that, this competencies framework has been developed and is out there for you as well. Trends report. The current trends report is the 21 report. Normally we issue it kind of this week in connection with AAA, the annual meeting of AAA, but it's been delayed a little bit. I would think it's going to be out probably in the September, October timeframe. That's certainly something you want to take a look at. And some other things we have here, once again, going back to the webinars that are been archived. And here's one last thing for you. We do have certificates to the extent you're trying to build your own skill set. We have these programs put together where you can get big discounts. You can also run these programs as part of your coursework, and we can arrange these discounts for students as well. So I do have more slides, but I think maybe given time, I'll end it there, Zoe, and see if you have any questions.
Yes, we'll allow a few minutes for questions for Richard if anyone has any. All right, it looks like no one has any questions yet. If you want to go over a couple more of your slides, Richard, you're welcome to do so. We do have a little bit of time before Joe begins his portion of the presentation.
Okay, so this was some of the survey work we had done over the last couple of years, and in particular, this was a student survey, and we've trended these out a little bit. So we do see here, this was how familiar are you with evolution, and people have become more familiar with it since 21. So I think that's good news there. Still a ways to go, but moving in the right direction. Does CPA evolution impact your interest? I thought this was interesting. A little bit of movement, certainly big movement, I would say, back from 21. Not so much now in the current period, 22 to 23. Here, we ask questions on their interest in each of the disciplines, and you'll see here specifically students saying that they would be most interested in bar, although that has declined a little bit. With that said, TCP has increased a fair amount, and I'm not surprised at that. I was initially surprised at how low TCP was. ISC, I think, is clearly the most challenged area, and I suspected that, quite honestly, although people pursuing ISC, this is probably one of the biggest challenging areas that the profession has in building out the talent needs. So I think that's where, if you do have students who might have an interest in technology and data to begin with, they can be the real unicorns. They can be the rock stars when they get hired, and that would be an avenue I would certainly recommend pursuing. With that, we kind of asked students where, if they were having a minor or another major in a tech area, where would they focus their attention? And we were happy to see, assuming that was the case, they would be interested in the ISC section. So that was good. And then we asked kind of, questions on faculty about the blueprints. And I was a little disappointed, on the 40% of professors hadn't seen the blueprints yet. I'm hoping that's continuing to decline, that yellow portion and the green portion increasing. Here we asked professors, what we thought CPA evolution impact would have on their students, and you'll see there not much change. And the faculty's view of where students would end up, it's kind of interesting. There's a flip here on the TCP where it went the opposite direction with students compared to the professors. But I think, clearly BAR continues to be the strong one. And I think BAR, quite honestly, a lot of auditors will take BAR, business analysis and reporting. It's all about a lot about financial reporting. I can understand why that's high. In addition, that's probably also an area people going into business and industry would think about pursuing as well. And this one, 60-40, is where professors thought their kids were going to be out sitting for the exam. And that's probably the reality about what we're seeing right now. I think about 60% of people in accounting programs are actually sitting for the exam. We would love to get that number up as well. I know accounting enrollments are challenged to begin with. And so I think we've really got to work to try and do what we can to increase the interest of students sitting for the exam. And this was just kind of the various reasons why people might not sit for the exam. And that's it.
We've got a couple questions in the chat here.
Okay. All right.
Dan from the University of Kentucky asks, who are the respondents for those surveys that you cited, and what are the sample sizes?
The responses for the different surveys, I mean, we're doing them a little bit differently. Back in 17, when we did them, we did mass surveys where people responded to survey comments, and we typically try to get people from the profession. And what we're typically trying to do is not just from the profession, but getting people who are actually supervising newly licensed CPAs. We've changed up the approach a little bit. We, in dealing with some of our consultants, we're doing smaller sample sizes, but we're doing, I think, more informed samples where we're pulling people together more specifically based on the areas they're working in, and doing a little training session for them before they take the survey. So I would say the sample sizes now are probably, down in the 300 time frame. But back when we did the sample with 3,000, I will tell you, that was kind of a more random, but then they only got a narrow subject area where they provided us responses to. Now, when we get 300 people, they're providing it to us on a whole section of the exam. So we think it's a much better sampling model. And again, it is professionals who are supervising newly licensed CPAs.
All right, we have another question from Robert from Northern Kentucky University.
Okay.
Any idea if or when the textbook publishers will catch up with the content changes? For example, several tax topics are moving to the specialization area.
Right, and I do know we did have some discussions with one of the tax textbook providers, because they did want to license some of our data, and we did enter into an arrangement with them. And I would say it's kind of, textbook providers are certainly aware and focused. We've been doing outreach to them. Their uptake on it, I mean, it's certainly going to vary one to the other.
One last question in the chat from Derek from the University of Louisville. If there's one certificate given, then how do you demonstrate the specialization?
Yeah, the point is, people will take one of the disciplines of their choosing. And it is only one license. The point being, it's a single license. People should practice in areas that they're familiar and knowledgeable with to deliver services. So I was an auditor my entire life. I'm not going to start doing a whole bunch of people's tax returns, I can assure you. I do my own, I do my kids' tax returns. I do a couple of other relatives, but that's it. I'm not getting into the business of doing tax returns because it's not my, my core area of knowledge. So that's really self-regulated, but it is in the code of conduct that overall regulates that.
Any other questions for Richard before we move on to Joe's presentation? We will have time for more questions at the end as well. All right, looks like everyone's good. Thank you so much, Richard.
Thank you.
Joe, you're up.
All right. Thank you, Zoe. I guess, Rich, could you stop sharing your screen and I'll jump in there? There we go.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem at all. All right. Again, thank you, Zoe. It's great to be here and I appreciate you and the society putting this on. And I appreciate all the attendees here joining and really taking an interest on what is a clearly and obviously a significant change to the profession. And certainly I appreciate Rich being here. I learned a ton listening to that. Much of that was new information for me. So it's great to hear from someone who's part of the group doing this. So thank you, Rich. I will say at the beginning, although I've lived in Louisville for 20 years, I am a transplant, and you can probably tell by my accent. I am like Rich from the Northeast. I'm from Northeastern Pennsylvania. So you guys are going to get a lot of Northeastern accents today, and I will try not to talk too fast, as is my tendency. I am the executive director of the state board, as Zoe said. And as most of you know, the board is responsible for licensing and regulating certified public accountants and CPA firms throughout the state of Kentucky. And we also approve applicants and candidates to sit for the exam through Kentucky. And we kind of monitor that program and assist NASBA in processing folks through the process. So we are, of course, very invested in this as well. We've seen this, and let me say at the outset, Rich talked about the smart person stuff, the real meaty substantive issues. I'm going to dumb it down a little bit. I'm not a CPA by trade. I am an attorney. Don't hold that against me. But what I'm going to talk about mostly are the nuts and bolts kind of logistical issues that I hope that our candidates are starting to think about as this is going forward. So here is the diagram that I think anyone talking on CPA evolution has to put up. I think it's required. Rich covered it, so I'm not going to go over it too much. But you do see what is the result of many years of study and discussion and assessment at the new core and discipline model for CPA licensure. As you see, and as Rich covered, he covered much of this, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But once 2024 hits, all candidates testing will be required to pass 3 core sections of the exam, and they're up here: auditing and attestation, financial accounting and reporting, taxation and regulation. There's no choices in that matter. All 3 have to be passed by all candidates to be licensed as a CPA. The new twist now are the 3 disciplines that's been added and also was covered by Rich. Here our candidates do have a little bit of choice. So after they get, not after, but in addition to getting the 3 core sections passed, they can select one of the 3 new disciplines, which is business analysis and reporting, information systems and controls, and tax compliance and planning. So again, there is some choice for candidates now with the disciplines. If they have an interest in one or the other, they can go that route. But as Rich said, they cannot replace one of the cores with a discipline. I will note, and kind of some of these thoughts that might affect candidates. The nuances. A candidate can pass a discipline. Well, let me say that. Let me change the way I said that. A candidate is not required to take the same discipline after failing an attempt at it or after they pass and that discipline credit expires. So that's something that we'd like our students to be aware of. You're not wedded to that throughout the process. You can mix it up. But again, you can only pass one in addition to the core. So this is kind of the mapping system. Obviously, for candidates who are just starting out, who do not have existing credits, exam credits, and have not tested yet, it's pretty straightforward. You have to do what we just covered, the 3 core sections in one of the disciplines. Kind of the difficulty and the confusion are those poor folks who are kind of right in the middle of this process right now. And I do know from many meetings and conferences that NASB and the AICPA has put tremendous thought into this kind of collection of folks and to not disadvantage them unnecessarily. There really have been, I think, attempts made to lessen the burdens and hurdles that these folks are going to be faced with. But what they do have to contend with is this transition policy. And this slide kind of lays out how the current sections how the current sections map to what the new sections of the exam will be. And again, as Rich hit on, I'm just going to elaborate a little bit more. Odd, FAR, and Reg, as you can see, map directly to a corresponding core. And we changed the name, I think, in one of them a little bit. And as Rich said, the content of those sections will be changed in the ways he discussed. But in terms of the sections, those map directly. BEC is the problem child. That's the one that it's gone away, as Rich said. And in its place, it will map to one of the 3 new disciplines, and that's BAR, ISC, and TCP. So those are the folks, or those folks in the middle of this process are the ones who have to pay particular attention to that. So I do want to talk a little bit about those folks in particular here. First and foremost, no credits will be lost in any way by virtue of the transition to the new content. And that was something that I know the AICPA and NASBA took very, very seriously. Anyone who has a credit is going to be there again. You're not going to lose it when it switches over to the new content. So candidates who have credit for odd, FAR, and Reg on the current CPA exam will not need to retake the corresponding core sections. Those will carry over and you're good. Your credit will remain. Candidates who have a credit, an existing credit for BEC on January 1 of 24 will not have to worry about these crazy disciplines. They're not going to have to mess with any of the new stuff. They will have an existing credit for BEC. Conversely, however, if they don't have those things, that's where the mapping and transition policies are going to kick in. So if a candidate has not passed one of the cores, they will take that corresponding core and its new content in the 2024 exam. Likewise, if a candidate does not have an existing credit for BEC as of the switch over on January 1 of 24, they will not. If they have the credit, they don't have to take it. If they do not, they will have to take one of the disciplines. Similarly, if they have a credit for any of these and they expire, you will have to kind of go through that transition mapping policy. So any existing core credit, if that credit expires, candidates would have to pass the new core substantive exam in 2024. And likewise, if you have BEC going into 24, but it expires, you're going to have to take one of the disciplines and pass that to proceed. As Rich did say, and we really do want to emphasize it, there is still one CPA license. So that was important to NASB and the AICPA, again, as they're kind of envisioning this and going forward. Regardless of the candidate's chosen discipline, CPA evolution leads to one universal license, and none of the rights, privileges, or responsibilities will change at all from as they exist with the current license. And a CPA professional is in no way limited by the discipline passed. As Rich alluded to, you are covered by the requirement that you be capable and that you have the skills and knowledge sufficient to allow you to provide the services you are providing. But there is no limitation based on what discipline you take or pursue as to what you can do in actual practice. Again, nuts and bolts, real life issues, not the juiciest of matters, but I want to talk quickly about some of the key transition dates. We know that the cutover occurs on January 1 of 24, but we also need to be aware of some of the key dates that are going to precede that. So the last day for testing for all current CPA sections, every one that exists now, OD, BEC, FAR, and Reg, is anticipated to be December 15th. So no exam sections can be scheduled from the 16th through January 9 of 24. And that's going to be a dark period, no testing in any section that's just required for conversion of the IT systems. It's just the IT requirement. So there is going to be a period there where no candidates can test for any exams. It's a hard date switchover. At no point will there be the current exam still in practice and the new. There is no kind of crossover. It's a hard stop at the beginning of the year. So again, BEC being the problem child, I want to talk about some of the key specific dates for them. NASBA has announced that their gateway system, which is the way folks get notices to schedule and sit for sections of the exam, will stop processing those ATTs and notices to schedule on the 15th of November of 2023. So that is the last date to be approved to sit for the BEC section. So obviously candidates who want to get in BEC before the cutoff have to be aware of that date. And then so with the application process, we need to go back a little bit from that date. So October 13th, 2023 will be the last day that we here at the Kentucky board will accept first-time candidate applications to sit for BEC. And I want to contrast the first-time candidate application with the re-exam application. So the first-time candidate application is the initial application that's filed by someone who has not yet sat for a section. If they sit for an exam and fail it, they're doing the re-exam. So that would not be considered an initial application. So that October 13th date, that applies only to first-time applicants. November 8, 2023 will be the last day that we here at the board accept re-exam applications for BEC. And that's obviously a week before NASBA stops processing them. So those are the key dates with BEC we want to keep in mind. There are also some other key transition dates that we want to pass along. We will begin accepting here at the board applications for the new disciplines on December 1st of 2023. We have a new application form that will become live on that date. We had to go to the General Assembly and get that blessed, and there's all sorts of hoops you have to go through in state government. That's been done. So we are ready to start accepting new discipline applications as of December 1, 2023. So the notices to schedule for OD, FAR, and Reg may be used to schedule the current exam sections in 23 as well as the new course sections in 24. So there's not going to be any change to that. It's the same it's a little different application, but the processing of them will not change and there's no cutover. So candidates for the course sections can continually apply for OD, FAR, and Reg. Now they won't be able to sit during that dark period we talked about, the 16th through the 9th, but they can continue to submit applications. And the specific content of OD, FAR, and Reg is based on whether the candidate schedules to test in 23 or 24. So the notice to schedule is good for 6 months. So a candidate could get a notice to schedule now and would have to make the decision whether or not they would like to schedule and sit for the exam before the end of the year, in which case they would have the current content of the core sections, or if they would go into 24 and take the new substantive core sections. 2024 testing schedule. And I should say and give the disclaimer that all of these dates are subject to change. So they're not locked in stone or rock right now, but it is currently anticipated, like I said, the testing will commence again on January 10 of 24 for all new sections, disciplines and core. While the core sections, odd, foreign, reg, will be available for scheduling through March 26th, the discipline sections will only be available through February 6th in the first quarter. And I have a slide in a few ahead that is going to break down the actual specific dates of each quarter and kind of show how this is going to affect the candidates. But it is something that they really have to pay attention to in the planning, because there's going to be a limitation both in testing and in the timing of the score releases. And that's displayed here on our next slide. Due to necessary standard setting analyses and activities, exam scores are anticipated to only be released once per test section per quarter. So right now, the timing is usually about 2.5 to 3 weeks after a candidate sits. They can expect to get their score for that section. Right now, and I'm going to show you the exact dates in a second, it's only going to be once that quarter. So there's going to be a significant delay when compared to current timelines in terms of the score release. So this is the current kind of anticipated testing and score release timeline. And you can see in the second column there, the core test dates. As everyone knows now, we've gone to continuous testing. So there is no break until the end of 24, really December 15th, as to when a candidate can schedule and take an exam. And that was a tremendous progress from way back when there were dark periods. We're going back to kind of a limited dark period for the core. And there, as you can see by those dates, it's really only decreased by about a week. The real hit comes, as you see, in the discipline test dates. So for every quarter, it appears that there'll only be 1 month of actual testing for those disciplines. So that is something to certainly consider. And that is based on the psychometricians, to use a big word, and it is standard setting. It really is unavoidable. The smart people say these are the dates. So this is what we're dealing with here. So in terms of the test availability, and then you can see the score release dates. Someone sitting for a core early in January is going to have to wait about 5 months or so to get their score for that section. And it's going to get better. We really hope this will change. And I think Rich would share that the hope is in 2025 that it starts to turn back more to where things are going now, or where things are currently. But for a while, there really are going to be some significant delays. So we want to get the word out to candidates to build this in. So that lays out kind of the challenges that are really kind of unavoidable. So one of the things I wanted to share that the board has done, and Rich mentioned this as well, is to address the current 18-month timeline of conditional CPA credits. So under current administrative regulations, and they've been in place for several years now, once a candidate passes one section of the exam, he or she has 18 months to pass the other 3 sections, or that first passing section expires. And that is the rule currently in Kentucky and throughout, I think, almost every other state. To aid in the transition, the board took upon itself to review the recommendation, and again, Rich mentioned this, by NASB and the CPA, to make some changes to that 18-month timeline. But in addition to that, and separate and apart from that, is the first kind of extension I want to mention here. And this is the automatic extension that will kick in as of January 1 of 2024. So this does not affect the kind of fallback permanent timeline, which I'm going to talk about in a second, but this is just one kind of special one-off to help folks to ease the challenges we just went over in terms of timing that's going to be precipitated by the transition. So this one-time extension of credits will say that any candidate with the CPA credit on January 1 of 2024 will have such credits extended to June 30 of 2025. So that goes for every single candidate in the pipeline who has an existing credit. It doesn't matter when they got it or when it expires. If you have one as of January 1 of 24, that one is going to automatically extend to June 30 of 2025. So that happens without candidates having to do anything. That's just that's available. There's a second extension that the board in Kentucky has recently approved, and that is an immediately available 12-month extension of existing exam credits that must be requested pending formal promulgation of an administrative regulation change. So as Rich said, the NASBA had recommended a change from that 18-month timeline to 30 months. And our board met and in June approved that recommendation and actually decided then to change the dates or the timeline from 18 to 30 months. So that's what's set forth in this slide. So that's in process. But if anyone knows, again, state government, I'm bashing on it, and these things are there for a reason, but there is some red tape, as they say. So prior to formal promulgation of this regulation change, which could take 7 to 9 months, the board has granted me as the executive director the authority to extend exam candidates credits up to 12 months from the existing expiration dates on a case-by-case basis. Very importantly, please note the extensions are not automatically effectuating. So these are different from those that have credits as of January 1 of next year. And these must be specifically requested. So the thought process there was that the board agreed that 30 months rather than 18 is the proper timeline to use. And they didn't want folks, they call it the donut hole, if you will. Folks far enough along are going to get the benefit of that other extension. There's a group of candidates now who weren't going to get that. So our board wanted to give me the authority to kind of treat these candidates in this area similarly. And that's what this will do. So please help us get the word out. We're doing everything we can to inform folks of that. But the second one actually has to be requested. Once we get through the formal promulgation process, that change will become official and final, and anyone passing and gaining an exam credit, once that goes into effect, will thereafter have the full 30 months. But we want to take our shots at helping these folks now. So that's all the prepared materials I have. I will, like Rich, advise or commend some additional resources to your guys' attention. The evolution of CPA.org website has been very helpful to me. And please reach out to me at the board. I have this slide up with my contact information, the board email, and Holly Lemaster is our exam coordinator. She's probably the one to talk to. She's on the front lines, and that's our telephone number. We have on our website now, we've recently put up within the last week or so, a summary of what's kind of contained in this PowerPoint with some key dates. We have an FAQ section that kind of covers some of the nuances that maybe individual folks will find themselves in. And we put up this extension policy as well. So I'd be happy to answer any questions folks have. And again, I really do appreciate your time.
Thank you, Joe. We did have one question in the chat from Kim at Moorhead State, but you just answered it with your talk about the 30-month extension. Does anyone else have any questions for either Joe or Richard? You guys are a quiet bunch today. Well, if there is no further questions, I want to thank Joe and Richard again for presenting to us and taking time out of their day. I hope that everyone found it very helpful. I know I did. And I want to thank you all for attending today's presentation. And as I mentioned, this recording will be available afterwards. We're going to upload it to our YouTube channel, and I will send the link out to everyone once that is uploaded. And I will send out the materials as well. All right, so no further questions. I will let you all get back to prepping for the fall semester. Thank you.